Hey, how are you? Thanks for tuning in again. This is a episode in which we still cover the book Eastern Wisdom, Modern Life, collection of talks that Alan Watts held in the 60s. And this episode is actually going to be the last one, my last one on Alan Watts. I'm going to switch to another writer, another book in the next episode. I chose a topic that's actually quite dear to me. The lecture is called Not What Should Be, But What Is. And mainly it's concerned with our, sense of I-ness and, what our identification with the I has in terms of consequences. Alan Watts starts out with a question: what is meant when we use the word I? In the first part of the lecture, he basically looks at the consequences of our thinking I, or of I-ness. So according to Watts, the word I points to a hallucination, a false sense of personal identity. And he's not alone in that. Basically, he's backed by long tradition of Eastern religions and philosophy. He then goes on to describe some of the consequences that ensue, when human beings identify with this concept of I. The first consequence is that, whenever you think I, the mere fact that you do think I requires you to also think of another. So in order for I to be able to exist, there needs to be, an opposite, which obviously is another. So clearly, when you conceive of yourself as an I, it leads you to conceive of other people and of objects around you as other. And that is a dualistic view, and that tends to bring along with it a feeling of separation. So you feel separate from, what you perceive as other. And Alan Watts points out that the majority of people still think in terms of Newtonian physics, which probably is also true in our day and age today still, unfortunately. The whole of Newtonian physics basically is based on the notion that we have about our own existence, which is that we are separately existing I's. So it's both that Newtonian physics mirrors that self-concept, but it also reinforces it. And Alan Watts points out that is, of course, unfortunate, since back in the day, in the 60s, there already was quantum physics, which could have already led to another understanding of who we are. To contrast this first sort of view, of identifying with I, or with the concept of I, Alan Watts presents a contrasting view, which we could probably describe best as holistic view. It's a view that he held and that he keeps coming back to throughout his teachings and speeches. He keeps emphasizing the interconnectedness of beings and the unity of all existence. He keeps coming back to that sort of trope. And he feels that such a view is backed by modern physics, namely of quantum physics. His view, as I mentioned, reflects, much of the Eastern traditions. And in that view, human beings are an expression of, the energy of nature. It's like the expression of a underlying whole, if you want. So we're individual expressions of a underlying whole, which is a completely different view and of human beings. And it seems rational that in such a view we cannot exist, except in an environment, an environment which provides earth, air, water, and mild temperatures, as he puts it, and that you cannot separate human organisms from their environment. So that too, in his view, is an argument that we are interconnected in that sense. I'm going to read you a quick quote regarding this. If we cannot describe the behavior of organisms without at the same time describing the behavior of the environments, we should realize that we have a new entity of description it is not the individual organism alone, but a field of behavior. Our bodies, go with a sort of very complicated natural environment. We are an integral part of the environment. And he also says fairly that, we're usually not aware of that. So we do not have a vivid sensation of belonging to our environment, he says. Rather, we have the sensation of being, an I or an ego inside a bag of skin. So since we feel the ego that prominently, and that is not, in his opinion, the way we really or actually exist, he calls the I a hallucination. What keeps throughout this lecture coming back to the question, what is I? Because he hasn't answered what is I yet. So he starts to investigate further by looking at the term person. So what is a person? The root of the term person is the Latin word persona, which stands for mask or character. And it refers to the kind of masks that, actors wore in Greco-Roman dramas. So you could say that persona points to your person, your personality, and therefore your mask that you're wearing. And he says that in most cases, we identify with that mask. We identify with that person that, we think we are. So really we identify with something that is merely a representation. And generally we're not aware of ourselves except in that sort of symbolic way, So we're more related with the symbol that represents us than with what we actually are, which is quite an interesting thought. So, but the question what we actually are still isn't answered at this point, so this is what we're going to get into next. He owes us a description, a definition of what we actually are. And he gives us one in a series of arguments that run something like the following. When human beings think, we translate what is going on in nature into words, symbols, and numbers, for instance. So, and then we tend to confuse the world that actually is with the world as it is thought about, as we conceive of it, through the lens of same ego, that is supposedly having the thoughts. So, when identifying with the symbols of ourselves, we disregard that we are a psychophysical organism, conscious and unconscious, plus, as he pointed out in the beginning, our environment. So, in effect, we are the universe, he says, as centered on our organism. And this organism is in a mutual relationship with the universe. So, to illustrate that more, concept or image that he refers to, let me quote him again. Your image of yourself contains no information about how you structure your nervous system. It contains no information about your blood chemistry. It contains almost no information about the subtle influences of society on your behavior. It also does not include the basic assumptions of your culture, which are all taken for granted and unconscious. So what he's saying by this is he points to, how limited our concept of ourselves as a signifier is when we say I, or when we are referred to as a person having a certain personality. It's almost like a caricature of what we actually are. Now, it works both ways. Firstly, when the word person or personality points to us, it greatly simplifies, what is being pointed at. But also looking out, when you look at the world, or when you perceive the world through the lens of that I, of that feeling of I-ness, you limit you limit you limit your sense of reality. You limit what you're able to perceive a great deal. So what goes further in saying that, adjacent to that illusion of I-ness, to that basic illusion, there is other illusions. So there's some more consequences resulting from that illusion of ego. And the first one being that when we identify with an ego, we tend to think of time as being real, and that there is such a thing, that there really is such a thing as the past. What he means is that we tend to reify past events. We tend to make them real, we tend to make the past stick, if you will, in the form of concepts that we store, concepts as memories. So those memories make up a large part of our so-called personalities, and they still have an effect on who we are at the moment, momentarily. But not only do we tend to make the past a thing and to keep it alive in our memory, but we also tend to project ourselves into the future. So we hope, for things to come. So we put ourselves, if you wish, on this timeline, between faded memories and faint hopes in the future. And this is what keeps us out of the present. This is what keeps us out of this supposed, door of perception that can open up when you are smack in the middle of the present. And it makes us seek, and long, and it keeps us looking and seeking. So the illusion of ego leads to the illusion of time and the illusion of becoming. And that illusion of becoming is a really interesting thought because, well, first of all, we talked about it at length when we discussed the last book by J. Krishnamurti and David Bohm, The Ending of Time. So he points sort of in the same direction, only to emphasize another point, and that is, when he looks at his contemporaries and the popularity of spiritual movements, he says that we become interested in spirituality because we want to change our consciousness, and according to what that, wanting to change your consciousness rests on the illusion of becoming. And so it rests on the illusion that you could become someone else, and that in turn rests on the illusion that there is someone who could become something else in the first place. And to drive that point home, I'm going to read you another quote. The biggest ego trip is getting rid of your ego. And of course the joke of it all is that your ego does not exist. There is nothing to get rid of. It is an illusion, as I have tried to explain, but still you ask how to stop the illusion. But who is asking? In the ordinary sense in which we use the word I, how can I stop identifying myself with the wrong me? The answer is simply that you cannot. The point is that, another quote, if you really understand what your I is, you will see there is no method to get rid of it. If you cannot achieve it, if you cannot transform yourself, that means that the main obstacle to mystical vision has collapsed. The obstacle was you. So I find that a very important thought. I find that a very important insight, and I'm sure that you can detect that, in people you know well, when they turn to spirituality. They don't seem to become less egoic, but they tend to develop a spiritually polished ego, The last thing that Watts offers in this lecture is he contrasts, a world in which, or a view of the world in which there are actors, in which there are eyes or egos that are doing things, and a more fluid or world or influx world that is simply happening. So he contrasts these two worlds. He starts describing life as happening, So according to him, we function by happening, that is to say, by spontaneous occurrence. And I'm going to offer you a last quote. Your breathing is happening, your thinking is happening, your feeling is happening. What you took to be the thinker of thoughts is just one of the thoughts. What you took to be the feeler of feelings is just one of the feelings. What you took to be the experiencer of experience is just part of the experience. So that concludes this chapter. If you are interested in Alan Watts' content, go check down in the description box. I linked the original recording of the same lecture, and also you can acquire an audiobook or a hard copy of the book if you wish. Hope this was interesting to you, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.